Part 3. Encounters. 19. I don't know how long I was out, but when I awoke, I was lying face down on a cold, unyielding surface that was bouncing and vibrating under me. I hurt. My right arm and shoulder felt like they were about to fall off, and my head was splitting agony. My arms were behind my back, and I felt a tight pressure around my wrists. After a few moments, I became aware of the noises around me, including the noise of an engine. I was in a truck or van. I began to struggle, which caused the bindings on my wrists to feel as if they were cutting into my skin. "It'll be all right," I heard a voice whisper. "Ben." "Shush, we don't want the gods back here again," I heard Brooke whisper back. Turning my head in their direction, I strained my eyes to try and see anything in the darkness. It was pitch black wherever we were. I gave up and just closed my eyes again. "What happened to Luke?" I asked, speaking as loudly as I dared, which is to say a harsh whisper. "Isaac, you're awake," said Ben, relief flooding his voice. "We've been captured by a Chinese patrol." "Thanks for the news flash, old chap," I said, then groaned as I rolled over toward their voices. "Luke's in here too, someplace. Probably still unconscious from his last thrashing," he responded evenly, my sarcasm lost on him or ignored. "Be quiet, both of you," Brooke said under her breath. "Luke woke up when they were loading us into the back, and he made a ruckus. They hit him on the back of the neck and knocked him out again. We wouldn't want the same thing to happen to any of us." "Any idea where we are, or where they're taking us?" I asked, dropping my whisper lower. "No, they tied our hands behind our backs and piled us into the back of this truck, Ben explained. "I tried to catch what they were saying to those traders, but they were too far away. You really got that little prick a good one, by the way. I imagine he'll think twice before he mouths off to someone again." Well, yes, it all made sense now. The abundant food, the gas, and the insistence we stay just one more night. Their strange willingness to help us. They were working for the Chinese, trapping unsuspecting American kids and calling them in to collect. The house was a honey trap. How long was I out? We'd been driving for about 30 minutes. 30 minutes? Was that all? I felt like I had been out for a whole day at least. I tried to sit up, which was not easy with my hands tied behind my back. Finally, I shuffled to the wall of the truck and managed to maneuver myself into a sitting position. Twisting my hands and fingers around, I discovered thin plastic bindings held my wrists. They had not actually cut into me, but were tight enough that my fingers were starting to get tingly. "What are we going to do, Isaac?" Ben asked. I felt helpless and very much lacking as a leader right then, even though I hadn't asked for the gig. "I'm not sure. Let me think on it for a while." We fell into silence. To be honest, I didn't do a whole lot of thinking. The pain in my head and the other injuries I'd suffered didn't leave room for much besides self-pity. About a half hour after I awoke, a groan came from the darkness near the rear of the truck. "Luke?" "Yeah," he groaned. "I think my skull is caved in. Where are we?" "Still in the truck. Don't speak too loudly." "Yeah, not sure I could if I wanted to." "Ben and Brooke?" "We're here," the twins said in uncanny unison. Luke giggled despite his obvious pain. "Just rest for now," I said. "Not much else we can do." "Okay." We fell silent again. I still felt disoriented, but was slowly coming back to my senses. The truck drove on at an even speed, slowing occasionally to turn in tight arcs before speeding up again, weaving past abandoned vehicles, I assumed. After what I think was about another half hour, the vehicle slowed, and I found myself sliding across the metal floor and tipping onto my right side as the driver turned the corner a little too fast. I barely registered the truck stopping through the reignited pain in my bruised arm and shoulder. Doors slammed up front, and there was a short pause before the roller door clattered open to reveal the silhouettes of our captors. I blinked rapidly as my eyes adjusted to the dim light. One of the soldiers climbed in. "Pit stop," he said, in heavily accented but surprisingly good English. "You will use the bathroom now." We learned later that many Chinese patrols had soldiers attached to their units who had spent time in America as exchange students. "What if we don't have to go?" Luke groaned. "It's your last chance to go. We have a long drive ahead and no more pit stop. The only stops ahead are to collect more kids like you along the way." "I could take a leak," I said, using the wall to force myself to my feet. "Thanks." "You are all going, everybody up, and no funny stuff. We're watching, and we put away the rubber bullets from last night. If you try to run, we'll use the real thing," the soldier said, patting the small machine gun he was holding before slinging it over his shoulder. The rubber bullets had been bad enough. I never wanted to feel the impact of a live round, that was for sure. I stepped down and out from the van with the help of the English-speaking soldier. We were at a rest stop beside a freeway, and it was still dark, but the sky was brightening with a pink pre-dawn glow. At the restroom door, the soldier stopped us. "One at a time," he said. "I am watching, and Chan is watching around the back. Like I said, no funny stuff." He pulled Brooke forward and turned her around, pulling a small pocket knife from the pocket of his uniform. He cut through the zip tie with one movement and shoved her toward the door. "Ladies first," he said. Brooke disappeared inside, but not before giving him a defiant stare over her shoulder. "You and Chan, huh? How many more of you bastards are there?" asked Luke. My eyes widened. The soldier looked at Luke, his cheekbone and chin bruised from his previous beating, and smiled dangerously. Without warning, he delivered a hard slap across his face. Luke looked at him insolently. "You have already been more trouble than you are worth, Mr. Redhead," the soldier said. "You better hope we don't find many more pickups between here and Washington. If the truck gets too full, it's possible that accidents may happen to some of you." "Washington State or the city?" I asked quickly. My reason for the question was to take his attention from Luke, who looked like he was about to do some more poking. It was risky asking questions, but no riskier than Luke getting killed for impertinence. The soldier turned his gaze on me. "We think it is important to take you to a work camp in an unfamiliar area," he said. "Less chance of trouble. But trucking you all the way across the country is cost prohibitive. New workers are relocated north and south, not east and west." "City, then," I replied, surprised that he was happy to talk. "Yes," he said. "The city." "You speak English very well," I said. "Where did you learn it?" "Stanford," he said. "I went to graduate school there. American graduate schools are a joke, or were." "You have an advanced degree?" I asked. "What are you doing on a detail like this?" "Like I said, American graduate schools were a joke. Most business and government agencies at home consider my doctorate in anthropology to be little better than the Chinese equivalent of a master's degree." The soldier stepped over to the bathroom door and rapped loudly. "You are taking a long time, honey. Hurry up." It was then, over his shoulder, that my eyes were drawn to the shadows at the corner of the bathroom block. At first, I thought I was hallucinating, but when I concentrated, there was no doubt. Someone in a ski mask, their head a darker shape in the shadows, was peering at us from the corner of the building. I didn't react. I was pretty sure the others didn't spot our visitor, and the arrogant soldier was oblivious. Then the shape was gone, vanishing so quickly I almost questioned whether I had really seen anything. "You haven't till I count to 3, the soldier yelled and banged on the door. "After that, if I must, I will come in and help you finish up." "You bloody," Ben started, but Luke and I quickly stepped between him and the soldier. "That won't help, Ben," I said, for the benefit of our captor, then mouthed, "Just wait," before, "It'll just get you beaten up like us." Ben and Luke looked at me with eyebrows raised, but we all turned to the soldier when he began to count. 1, 2, 3. He didn't finish his count. We saw him tense and stiffen before stumbling away from the door and spinning around to look at us angrily. We stepped back as he reached over his shoulder, grasping for something. "What?" he began, but crumpled to the ground before he could finish. I rushed over to him and fell to my knees, twisting my back to him so I could get my bound hands close to the knife that hung on his belt. "Quick, help me get his knife," I said to Luke. "We can cut our wrists free and get the hell out of here." I knew the person in black had done this, but I had no way of knowing if the enemy of my enemy was my friend. If we could get free and get the truck, we might not need to find out. Isaac?" Luke replied, looking over my shoulder and not moving. "What are you waiting for, Luke? Hurry!" "Isaac, there are 2 guys dressed like ninjas right behind you." "Yes," said Ben, stepping up beside him. "And they aren't the turtle kind." I spun around and saw the black-clad person I had seen before and a taller man dressed identically. They weren't really dressed as ninjas, I realized. They were in black kung fu gear with ski masks. The taller one was holding a sort of tube thing in his hands, and I realized it was a blowgun. My friend Tommy used to have the Nerf version of one. We'd played with it the last time I had seen him. "Cut them free," the taller figure said to his partner. "I'm going to see if Allie and Arthur have secured the truck." "This guard said there was another one around the back of the building," I said. "Already taken care of, before we got your friend out through the bathroom window," our mysterious savior said as he walked away. "Is Brooke safe?" Ben asked the one who had approached us. "The girl? Yes. Well, as safe as can be expected," he said, producing a pocket knife. "Turn around and I'll free your hands." He quickly cut us free and pulled his mask off to reveal a teenage face framed by shaggy blonde hair. With the ski mask off, he looked more like a surfer than a ninja. "Thanks," I said. "I'm Isaac. This is Luke and Ben." "I'm John," he replied. "Follow me. Sonny wants us to gather at the truck." "What truck?" Luke asked. "The one you came in, of course. Come on." We followed John back to the truck, where we found 2 more ninjas. They were standing over 2 more Chinese soldiers who were laid out next to the cab. Both of their heads rested at awkward angles. "Oh dear," Ben said quietly. As we reached them, the taller one, and a girl with long dark hair holding her ski mask in her hand, led Brooke out to us. The tall one, who was obviously the leader, then pulled off his mask. He was Chinese. I guess I flinched because he looked at me and immediately burst out laughing. "Don't freak out, man," he said in a perfect American accent and held out his hand. "I'm not one of them, but luckily I have their genes, or I'd have been dead meat when the flu hit. I'm Sonny Lee." I shook his hand and introduced our group. Within a few minutes we had our backpacks back and, happily, also our weapons. They had been confiscated by the Chinese back at Will's and had been loaded into a cargo trunk under the side of the truck. Obviously, the Chinese didn't allow Will's group to keep more weapons than necessary. Sonny offered us refuge with his group for as long as we wanted. Unlike my first impression of Will, Sonny came across as welcoming and honest from the get-go, and besides, he had demonstrated clearly that he wasn't in cahoots with the Chinese. They were based in Worcester, too, which was our next goal, so we all agreed to take up their offer. "You guys get the truck loaded. I have something to take care of. John, you can help me." They headed back to the restrooms, and when they returned, Sonny was wearing the uniform of the man who had been escorting us. The look on his face was grim, and it didn't take much to work out what he'd done with the unconscious officer. From the rear of the truck where I was about to climb in, I saw them drag the 2 bodies by the truck away. When they were done, John climbed in with us and Sonny closed the roller door. The pit stop had come at the first rest area on the freeway between Worcester and Boston. Sonny's other ninjas were all teenagers, Allie, Karen, and Arthur. During the trip, Sonny's crew were very forthcoming, and we asked a lot of questions. It turned out Sonny was a Chinese American, born in China less than a week before his parents had come to live in the United States. Sonny had no memories of his homeland. He barely spoke Chinese, as his father had been adamant that he be raised as an American. The only place where this didn't apply was in martial arts. Mr. Lee had made sure his son was well trained in traditional Chinese arts, such as Tai Chi and Wing Chun Kung Fu. Sonny had apparently taken such training to heart. The others explained he'd won several martial arts tournaments as a teen and a young adult, and when the infection came, the 28-year-old Sonny had been the Sifu of one of the most popular martial arts academies in the state. Arthur, John, Allie, and Karen were what remained of his students, along with Mark and Samara, who had been left back at their base of operations. I didn't let on about my own kung fu experience just then. We had only just met them, and as good as the first impressions were, I felt it might be better to keep my cards close to my chest, especially given what had happened when we trusted Will and his group. After a quick stop at a department store outside of Worcester to load some supplies into the back of the truck, we were soon on our way to the Martial Arts Academy, where Sonny and his students had been holed up since Hell Week. 19. Sonny parked the truck in the underground garage next to the academy, and we helped unload the supplies they'd picked up. The academy took up the whole ground floor of a low-rise building. It was carpeted and tidy, with equipment and gear stowed neatly on shelving against the wall. I also saw a rack of assorted hand weapons that took my interest. When we were done, we sat around a table drinking Long Life apple juice Sonny had poured us as the others packed away the new supplies. I asked him if he'd felt safe driving the truck. They marked their trucks with a special paint on the top to identify them to their satellites. So until the truck is reported as overdue, Chinese monitoring won't pick up the truck as a threat. Of course, it's lucky they don't have checkpoints set up here yet. I'm not so confident I could have bluffed my way through a face-to-face meeting, uniform or no uniform. "Will you get rid of it?" asked Luke. "Yeah, we can't keep it very long. Tonight after dark, we'll drive it to a different parking garage and burn it," Sonny said. "This'll make the third truck we've hijacked from them in 2 weeks, so the heat might be on if they work out where we've ended up." "Third?" I said. "And they haven't changed their routines or sent an armed response?" "Just choppers. I think the first couple of times they probably thought it's just a group of kids. Might be different this time, given that there were prisoners in it and that we killed 4 soldiers instead of the 2 we were expecting. We have a radio from the soldier in the first truck we took, so we listen in on their chatter now and then, although I'm the only one here that even partially understands it." "They're probably speaking Mandarin, while it sounds like you might be Cantonese," Brooke said. "That's right. How did you know?" He looked impressed. "They call you Sifu," Brooke said. "That's a Cantonese term. In Mandarin, the term is Shifu, subtle, but still a difference." "You speak Chinese?" Sonny asked. "Just a little," she replied, blushing. "I had a year of Mandarin, and the teacher often liked to point out the difference between Mandarin and Cantonese." "Do you or any of your blokes know Morse code, by any chance?" Ben asked, stepping up beside his sister and placing a hand on her shoulder. "I think Arthur and John have a handle on it," Sonny said. "They were both Boy Scouts. Why?" We spent half an hour telling Sonny what we knew of the message and what we had worked out. I think we'd all just decided it had to be done. We had to trust someone, and this seemed like the right opportunity and the right company to do it in. "Do you have a normal radio with AM reception?" I asked. "It would be great to get the message written down so we have more to go on." "Of course, although we haven't turned it on in weeks. I hadn't even thought of trying the AM channels," Sonny said, and pointed to Luke and me. "We'll get it out later. Let's check your injuries first. You two especially look like you've been in the wars." Sonny, who apparently had some medical knowledge but no formal training, took some time to check over our assorted injuries and bruises. Brooke made herself scarce when Luke and I took off our shirts, while Ben looked as if he was torn between mentioning his dog bite on the backside or following his sister out the door. In the end, he chose the latter, and Luke and I had a chuckle. "Anything I should be aware of?" asked Sonny. "No, nothing," I said, still smiling. Sonny probed the lump on my forehead as gently as he could, but it hurt like hell. I sucked in a pained breath. "Sorry. I don't think your skull is fractured, but you probably still have a mild concussion. The lump on your head and the black eyes will fade in a week or 2. My arm and shoulder had come out in a massive purple bruise where the rubber bullet had hit me, but again, he didn't think there were any fractures or permanent damage. At least the new injuries meant I barely even felt the muscle I had strained in my thigh anymore. He moved on to Luke. Luke's rib cage was badly bruised, and based on the tenderness, Sonny thought he may have some cracked ribs. Of course, without an x-ray it's impossible to tell, but I'll strap you up anyway. He didn't show any signs of concussions when Sonny looked into his eyes. Apparently, the Chinese soldiers had been quite skillful in disabling us without doing too much damage. When he was done, he looked us over. You guys look beat, and after what you went through, who can blame you? Go ahead and take a load off. The practice mats make excellent beds. I'll wake you if we learn anything new. That is exactly what we did. The practice mats did make rather good mattresses to sleep on compared to the rocky ground, although they weren't really comparable to a real bed. Beggars aren't choosers, though. Ben and Brooke bunked down with us, too, and Sonny made sure the other kids gave us some time to ourselves. Luke and Ben were snoring almost as soon as they lay down, and Brooke was sleeping soundly not long after. I was tired, too, but it took a while for me to get to sleep. I was thinking about how lucky we had been. Lucky that our captors had chosen to stop where they had. Lucky that Sonny and his group had been out that particular night on one of their missions to harass the enemy. Hopefully, it meant our fortunes were turning. I also thought about Sonny. He had been born in China, but raised as an American, and he had a rage inside of him that scared me a little when I heard him talk about the Chinese that were invading his homeland. He seemed competent at leading his group of students, and if the trophies in the case by the front doors of the academy were any indication, he was probably capable of kicking a tremendous amount of butt. I worried, though. What would happen to him in his wards if the Chinese military decided to launch a strike on Worcester to stop the truck disappearances? I did not want to be here when that went down. A few isolated patrols without support were one thing, but somehow I doubted that Sonny's ninjas would be up to taking on a larger group of Chinese soldiers focused on hunting them down. I decided I would do my best to talk them into coming with us to the safe haven. They would certainly be an asset to our little group. Finally, my weariness got the better of me, and I fell asleep feeling more hopeful than I had since the dog attack. I rarely remember my dreams, but that day I clearly remember dreaming of Sarah on a road, winding its way through a forest. She was walking away from me and wouldn't look back, no matter how loud I called or how far I followed her. It was late afternoon before Sonny woke us up. He told us that both Arthur and John had listened to the coded message and confirmed it was the same message repeated over and over, switching frequencies every other time. Maybe it's automated? It might even be a trap, he worried. Maybe, but I don't think the Chinese would go to all that trouble when they just round up everyone, said Luke. They have all the time in the world, after all. Excited, we all rushed to the kitchen where Arthur and John sat by the radio. Arthur slid the writing pad to me. Safe Haven NH. Look for the dragon on the White Mount. So there's no actual location? This isn't much more than we already knew, I said, slightly disappointed. No, it figures, said Luke. They can't be too detailed. It has to be cryptic in case the Chinese come across it. I don't even know if they use Morse code, but if they do, the message is backwards and only contains clues. It's pretty clever, really. Let me get my atlas, now that we have light and my fingers aren't ice blocks. He rushed out of the room. When we go, are you going to come with us? I asked. We'd be glad to have you. Sonny didn't answer right away, perhaps conscious of the stares from Arthur and John. I don't know, he said. We have it pretty sweet here at the moment, but who knows how long that will last. True. And think, even if we don't find any other survivors there, it's going to take the Chinese longer to colonize the mountains of New Hampshire than it is the urban centers like Worcester, I said. He nodded, looking thoughtful. We'd have to think on it and run it by the others to see what they think. Luke hustled back in, slamming the atlas on the table and poring over the map of New Hampshire. I looked over his shoulder as he ran his finger over and around the part of the map showing the White Mountains National Forest. His finger halted after only 30 seconds. Then he pressed it into the page hard enough for the tip to go white. "There it is, my friends," he declared, looking at me triumphantly. He was pointing at a spot in the national park identified as Drake Mountain. Drake Mountain? The others joined us, jostling for a view and bumping heads. "Yes," he said. "Drake Mountain. What about it?" "Drake. Drake is another word for dragon. Dragon on the White Mount." "Ah, of course," I said, the penny finally dropping. "I've been there," said a voice behind us. It was Allie. She had come into the room as we crowded over the map. "My parents took me to Drake Mountain Ski Resort 2 years ago." "Well done, Luke," said Sonny, clapping him on the shoulder. My friend looked extremely happy with himself, and I couldn't blame him. For the moment we were all happy, the woes of the world forgotten in the glow of this little beacon of hope. After we had all calmed down a little, we talked through what we had found out. "So, it's close to Lincoln, on the southern edge of the White Mountain National Forest," said Sonny. "That's about 150 miles from here to there. Not a fun trip, and especially now that the weather looks like it's turning for the worse." "He's right," Luke said, after a quick flip back to the Massachusetts page. "That's a hell of a walk, man." "I'm hoping we don't have to." "To what?" "Walk," I said with a smile. "Sonny's shown us the way. We commandeer a Chinese patrol truck and drive it there. 150 miles shouldn't take us longer than, say, 3 or 4 hours. If we have any luck at all, we can do that well before it's reported overdue." "I'm not sure I'd count on our luck, dude," Luke said, shaking his head. "It seems to be running both ways lately, and there's no telling when it'll be good or bad." 21. Later, when we were alone, Luke and I ran through our options. "We have a while to work on a plan," I said. "A few days at least, until the uproar over the missing truck dies down." "Stay here in the meantime?" "If Sonny will let us. He seems like a straight-up guy," I said. "I can deal with a few more nights of sleeping on those mats," Luke said, his face splitting into a smile. "After the beatings and rubber bullets, my body needs a recharge." "Yep, me too," I said. A couple of hours later, as night began to fall, Sonny asked if any of us wanted to ride with him to dump the rental truck in a parking garage about a few blocks away. Arthur, Karen, and I put our hands up. Arthur and Karen were both about my age. She was a pretty redhead with, by all reports, a fiery temper. Arthur was tall and muscular, with a shock of brown hair and a nose like a knife blade. Despite their bickering over silly things like who would sit by the passenger side window, it was obvious to me they had a thing for each other. We took along 2 5-gallon gas cans and a single 20-pound portable propane tank. "Grab the propane and gas out of the back," Sonny said to Arthur as he parked the truck in the underground parking garage. We had gone down 2 levels below the street and parked in an area well clear of other vehicles and structures. Arthur jumped to it, and soon we had the propane canister sitting on the floor of the cab beneath the dashboard. "Spread the gas in that can around the cargo area of the truck," Sonny instructed Karen, while Arthur dumped the contents of the other can in the cab, making sure to get a nice puddle around the propane canister. Sonny handed me a road flare. "Do you know how to use this?" he asked. "I've seen it done," I replied. "Light it up and toss it in the back, all the way to the front so Arthur has time to pull the door shut. I'll do the same up here. We'll make sure that the Chinese never use this truck again, even if they do find it." We did as we were instructed, and then walked briskly to the stairs and began climbing back to street level. Karen pointed out a sprinkler system mounted on the rafters of each floor, but, of course, with no power, there was nothing to trigger them. Just as we exited onto the street, there was a muffled boom beneath us. The propane canister had blown. It was a clear night, a welcome respite from the snowy, overcast weather of the previous few days. There was a full, silvery moon, and it caught our attention, looking so big I felt I could reach out and touch it. With no cloud cover, though, the night was extremely cold, and I was shivering despite my heavy parka as we walked the mile or so back to the academy. Along the way, Sonny mentioned that a local street gang had been moving out of their normal territory since the flu and might be a problem. I have to admit, I wasn't really paying too much attention. I should have, but I was more concerned about a Chinese military patrol happening upon us at any moment. We stayed 4 days at the academy and would have stayed more if fate hadn't conspired to force our hand. Well, fate or dumb luck or God, or whatever you happen to believe in. Sonny had been right. The day after we dumped the truck, there was a lot of radio activity from the Chinese along with choppers buzzing above Worcester and the roads leading in and out. From what little Sonny and Brooke could understand from the radio chatter, a sweep through on Worcester by the military seemed imminent. We didn't have much choice. Laying low seemed like the only thing to do. Besides, Sonny and his group had not yet decided if they wanted to come with us or not. Giving them more time to decide seemed like the right thing to do. Beside the constant worry that the Chinese might discover us, it was a great few days. We were able to recharge and recover from our injuries. I finally let on about my kung fu experience, and for the first time in over a month, I was able to practice and spar. Sonny's crew were good, especially Arthur, who I could tell was on par with my own skill, possibly better, although I wouldn't admit it. I had a few sessions with Sonny, and he was way out of my league, on another level completely, in fact. By the 4th day, I was managing to hold my own against him, defensively at least. Luke took the opportunity to practice his crossbow. All that gaming appeared to have come in handy. He was a natural, and with practice shooting at the kung fu punching dummies in the academy's long practice hall, he became absolutely lethal. He painted targets on them and was able to hit the bullseye every shot after just 2 days. He even had time to craft his own arrows, and apart from the painted finish and slightly more refined materials of the originals, I could barely tell the difference between his and the manufactured ones. To say the least, I was in awe of his many skills and wondered what other talents he might have hidden behind that slightly goofy exterior. The forced confinement had another benefit: information. While foraging, 2 days before finding us, Sonny told us he and 2 of the others had met 3 survivors as they passed through Worcester. The 3 teenagers had also come up from Rhode Island, but from the city of Warwick. They were led by a headstrong girl who told Sonny that the Chinese were using children as slave labor to clear the city of its dead. She had speculated that Warwick was their foothold in the state due to its sea access. It was useful information and only confirmed our worst fears. "What happened to them?" Brooke asked. "Well, they seemed really decent kids and we invited them to stay, but she wasn't interested. They were heading north to Canada." Our 4 new mouths taxed the food supplies at the academy. Luckily, with each day that passed, the Chinese aerial activity lessened, and if they had sent in ground patrols, we hadn't seen any. Sonny deemed it safe to head out and forage on day 4. "Would you and Luke be interested in going out on an expedition to get more supplies?" Sonny asked. "Hell yeah," Luke answered for both of us. "No offense, but I would love to get out and get some fresh air." "Okay, good. I thought you might. There are grocery stores a few blocks from the academy, and a couple carts of canned food would feed us all for a while longer. I'll sketch you a map." It was decided we would go out that night under the cover of darkness. "Remember not to cross Foster Street," Sonny said, as Luke and I prepared to slip out through the side door of the academy. "It's the turf of that gang I told you about, the Red Tigers." "Okay." Sonny handed me an assault rifle which had been taken from the Chinese soldiers who captured us. The rifle was heavy and designed in what I thought was a funny way, with the magazine and action located behind the grip and trigger. It was a style Luke called bullpup, and he said it was the new big thing in assault weapons. It was supposed to offer better control or something. Luke rejected the rifle Sonny offered him and held up his crossbow. "Quieter," he said simply at Sonny's raised eyebrow, and showed him the handful of crossbow arrows he had in the large pocket of his parka. Old-fashioned it may have been, but it looked plenty deadly in the cold light of the open doorway. Sonny gave me a quick run-through on how to operate the weapon. He showed me the selector switch, which was currently set on 1. The other settings were 2 and 3. He told me on setting 1, the gun shot 1 bullet at a time. On 2, it shot a 3-round burst. And on 3, it was probably fully automatic, meaning I'd burn through my ammo with one squeeze of the trigger, and that the gun would be a bitch to control. Sonny sounded so confident that he knew what he was talking about. I took it as gospel. In the end, he turned out to be almost right. I switched the selector over to 2 before we left the alley. If there was trouble, a 3-round burst would be more than adequate. "It's freaking cold out here tonight, dude," Luke said, carefully stepping around a sheet of ice on the sidewalk. We were dressed in our normal clothing, although I had added a stocking cap under my parka's hood because it was another clear and very cold night. "Yeah," I said, watching my breath plume. I had one slip and only caught myself at the last moment. The black ice on the concrete was almost invisible. "I hope these stores aren't completely looted," I said, concentrating more carefully on the path ahead. "I'd hate to think we're wasting our time." "Sonny seemed confident," Luke said. "I don't think he'd send us out if he didn't think there was a good chance of us getting something." "He could be hoping," I replied, "but that can be dumb sometimes." "Man, everyone's got to have hope. It's what keeps us going." "Well, every time I find myself hopeful, everything turns to shit," I said, not sure why my mood had darkened. "You're hopeful of getting to the safe haven," Luke pointed out with a grin. "That tells me you still have some hope." "Well, I guess," I said, "but I have my doubts we'll ever get there. Between wild dogs, psycho traitor kids, and the Chinese army, I don't think our chances are that great." "Okay, Debbie." "Huh?" "Debbie Downer." "Oh, yeah, funny. Look, do I want to get to the safe haven? Yes, of course I do. Do I expect that I will? Look what happened to Sarah. That sort of thing could happen to any of us at any time." Luke was quiet for a moment. "Have you ever heard of Pandora?" he asked finally. "The internet radio thing?" "No, the legend," Luke said. "A long time ago, there was this dumbass giant, Epimetheus, who wanted a wife, so the gods made him the perfect woman. Her name was Pandora. Now, this dumbass giant had been given a magical box, like a golden chest or something. The king of the gods told him that it must never, ever be opened. After Pandora became his wife, the first thing Epimetheus did was show her the box and tell her it must never be opened. Or telling someone not to do something only makes them want to do it, and all she could think about was what treasures might be in that box. So one night, while Epimetheus was fast asleep, Pandora crept down to the treasure room and decided to take the tiniest peek at what was inside the box. As can be expected, it didn't turn out so well. When the gods decree that something shall not be opened, you damn well want to keep it closed. "Okay, you have my interest," I said. "What was in the box?" Pandora opened the box, just a crack so she could take a peek, but the box was flung open by the force of what it held inside. All kinds of monsters, plagues, pestilence, and disease came flooding out of it. All the evils of the world, followed by old age and death, 2 things the world had never known to that point. Imagine that, living in a world where there was no sickness, no growing old, no death, and to suddenly have eternal, blessed life snatched from you. Anyway, all the evils of the world escaped the box, leaving only one thing behind. Looking into the now emptied box, Pandora spied hope lying at the bottom. Before then, without the adversity of the things that had been trapped in the box, there had been no need for hope. So I guess the moral of the story is that there's only really a need for hope when things are at their darkest. I'm impressed. You actually managed to turn your story into a metaphor appropriate for our situation, I said. "Well, of course. Was that not my intention?" he said in a deep, theatrical voice. "That's some heavy-duty mythology there, Luke. Did your parents read you a lot of books when you were little?" Nope, it was actually the background story for Goddess of Vengeance 2, he said with an impish smile and shrugged. It seemed appropriate. I should have spent more time playing video games. I didn't know they were educational. Well, it's not like all I ever did was play games, he said, somewhat defensively. Sorry, I laughed. I wasn't totally taking the piss. Games seem to have taught you a lot about coping with situations like this. I guess, he shrugged. Most of it doesn't transfer that well to real life. The old real life, anyway. It's a pity that part of my life is over. Yeah, a pity for all of us. Hey, there's a Honey Farm store. Want to try that first? I asked, pointing at the convenience store sign. It's not actually a grocery store, but I guess we don't have to worry about paying higher prices. Sounds good to me, Chief, Luke said, adjusting his course. Honey Farms was about halfway down the block, past a line of silent cars. The frozen snow and ice on the windows of the cars kept us from seeing inside of them, so we watched them warily as we trooped on past. A similar line of cars was parked on the far side of the street. I wondered, much like I had back in Fort Carter, if any of these cars might have frozen corpses in them, just sitting where they succumbed to the flu. I thought about knocking the snow off some windows and looking in, but decided against it. No reason to disturb the dead, if they're there, I thought. Besides, I had creeped myself out enough. The glass of the door to Honey Farms had been busted out, so it was not difficult for us to get inside. There were no shopping carts, but we found a rack of cloth grocery bags and each grabbed 2. It looked like a bunch of kids had ransacked the place. The chip and candy aisles had been demolished, but the limited range of canned soups and vegetables had hardly been touched. Luke kept a lookout while I loaded my bags first. I packed cans of chicken noodle soup and peas. I had almost filled the 2 bags when I spotted some cans of creamed corn on a higher shelf. I took out some of the peas to make room and replaced them with the corn. I've always had a thing for creamed corn. I realize it is a funny quirk to have, but I love the stuff. While Luke was loading his bag, I wandered up toward the front door to keep watch. A big half-moon was out in the clear sky, illuminating the road nearly as well as streetlights would have if they'd been working. I hadn't been standing there long when movement caught my eye. I ducked down, peering over the sill, and watched in surprise as a girl pulled herself out from under a car across the street and scampered down an alley. I didn't get a great look at her, but she looked to be about the same age as Luke and me. She was wearing a yellow rain slicker. Not good for stealth at all. Should we go after her? I asked, without taking my eye off the opening to the alley across the street. Go after who? Luke responded, looking up from his half-full grocery bag. There's a girl across the street. She just went down that alley, I said. A girl? Did it look like she needed help? Well, we are in the deserted remains of a city, and she just crawled out from under a car in the freezing cold, I said. I'm guessing she might need help. If she needs it, I'm all for helping her, man, he said, leaving the half-packed bag and walking up to the door where I stood. Okay, we'll go ask if she wants help, I said, setting my own grocery bags down. Maybe bring her some of that hope you've been talking so much about. We can grab the bags on our way back. We left the store and ran across the street to the mouth of the alleyway. The buildings crowded close together above it, dimming the moonlight. You sure she went in here? Luke whispered. Yeah. Okay, let's go. Luke took the lead, entering the alley with me close behind him. We hadn't gotten very far when we heard a scream from behind a dumpster about halfway down the alley. I guess she does need help, said Luke, cocking his crossbow and taking off. I unslung the automatic weapon Sonny had given me, and we rushed down the alley, doing all we could to avoid slipping on the thin sheen of frost that seemed to cover everything. As we approached the dumpster, we slowed and heard the sounds of a struggle and loud laughter. We had almost reached it when my foot struck an old soda can I hadn't seen. Luke and I froze in place as first one, and then another figure stepped out to confront us. 22. They were both Asian, wearing black leather jackets emblazoned with red tigers in the act of springing. Gangbangers. The guy on the right held a baseball bat with several long nails through it, and the other one was holding a knife. Seeing our weapons, the one with the knife quickly reached inside his jacket. "You kids better get lost," snapped the guy with the bat, who appeared to be the older of the two as he put his hand on the other one's wrist, preventing him from pulling out whatever he had reached for. "This is Red Tiger turf." "Help!" came a desperate cry from behind the dumpster, followed by what sounded like a slap. I took a step forward, and the one with his hand in his pocket pulled out the gun he had reached for. "Don't take another step, bitch," he barked. I heard a snap beside me, and suddenly the aggressor gasped, looking down in disbelief at the crossbow bolt buried deep in his chest. The pistol clattered to the frozen pavement as the guy fell to his knees before pitching forward. "Holy shit," the stunned man with the bat said, echoing my own thoughts. He took a step back as Luke calmly loaded another bolt into the flight groove of his crossbow, cocked it, and aimed it at him. "You shot him! Jack, he shot Sammy!" he called to whoever was still behind the dumpster. "Drop the bat," said Luke calmly. We heard a squeal followed by a curse and another slap. The sound of struggling behind the dumpster came to an abrupt halt, and a short, wiry guy stepped partially into view, careful to keep the dumpster between us and him. Like the other two, he was Asian, Chinese-American for sure, given that he looked to be in his 20s and was not dead of the flu. He held his hands up, but I could tell by the look on his face he wasn't surrendering, simply sizing us up. He had a small machine gun on a strap over his shoulder, the kind you see commandos use in old war movies. He looked like he'd seen plenty of hard life before the flu, and a ragged scar ran up the side of his face. He was intimidating, to say the least. After glancing down at the guy on the ground, he looked up at us, anger in his eyes. "Which one of you fuckers shot Sammy?" Apparently, he had sized us up and found us lacking. His right hand curled around the handle of his weapon. "I asked a question!" he yelled. "It was him, Jack," said the other gangbanger, his hand still up, at least until he saw which way things were going to go. I tensed as Jack raised his gun toward Luke. I had never actually shot a person deliberately before, and I didn't mean to start right then. But things sort of got away from me. I meant to put a 3-round burst into the pavement by his feet to scare him off, but well, the selector was set to 2. You see, Sonny had been wrong about the settings. 3 was actually the setting that gave a 3-round burst, while 2 was full machine gun rock and roll. Many people don't realize that a weapon firing on full automatic is not nearly like it is in the movies. In reality, it is very hard to control a weapon on full auto. Specifically, the combined recoil of all the shots going off tends to cause the barrel to rise, which is exactly what happened. The first few rounds hit the pavement between Jack's leg, just as I had planned. But as the shots kept coming, the barrel kept rising and walked the remaining rounds of my magazine up his right leg. They struck him from just below the knee up to his right hip into his abdomen before I was able to release the trigger. He hit the ground hard, dropping his weapon as he went. My mouth dropped open. Jack's right leg and side were a bloody, smoking mess. My ears were still ringing from the roar of the gunfire as the man with the bat dropped it and turned, running away like a madman. He jumped the high fence behind him as if his life depended on it. "Holy shit, dude," Luke said. I looked at my weapon in horror and let it drop from my trembling hands. Jack was screaming in agony, holding his leg to try and stem the bleeding. I stumbled to the wall of the alley and threw up the beans and franks I had eaten for dinner. Luke kicked Jack's gun away and rounded the dumpster. I took a few moments to compose myself, and wiping my mouth on my sleeve, followed him. The girl in the yellow slicker was slumped against the side of the dumpster. She was out cold, with her slicker open. The dirty sweatshirt underneath had been pulled up, exposing her belly and bra. Luke pulled her shirt down and buttoned up the slicker. You can see what that bastard was going to do, Luke said, taking in my pale face. You did the world a favor by blowing his ass away. I know, I said, nodding my head and looking back at the gravely wounded gang member. He had stopped screaming and was unconscious, or worse. I didn't mean to do it like that, though. Luke didn't seem fazed by the fact that he had just killed someone, and I respected his sense of purpose. He uncocked his crossbow and slung it over his shoulder before leaning over the girl. I'll carry her. You grab your gun, and we'll go back to get the groceries we already bagged up, he said, putting her over his shoulder and standing up. Let's get the hell out of here before Bat Boy comes back with reinforcements. What about him? I asked, after I picked up the automatic. There's nothing we can do about him now. In fact, I think he's dead, man. I looked more closely and saw the gangbanger's chest was still. I nodded solemnly, and we started walking. You okay carrying her? I asked, when we reached the end of the alley. Yeah, actually she's not that heavy, he said, flashing me a smile. Just awkward to carry. The trip back to the academy was done with as much haste as we could muster, and with constant glances over our shoulders to make sure we were not being followed. We kept to the shadowed side of the street, staying out of the moonlight as much as possible. We had to stop so Luke could rest several times, but each time he refused my offers to take a turn. He obviously knew I was in a state of shock, and I certainly didn't feel 100%, so I didn't protest. We saw no signs of pursuit. I think we need to consider moving our departure time up, a puffing Luke said, as we stood by the back door of the academy, waiting for somebody inside to answer our knock. Yeah, tomorrow night, or the night after at the latest. I'll talk to Sonny. Talk to Sonny about what? Brooke said, as she pulled open the door. Here now, who's that? A damsel in distress, Luke said, grunting as he took the step and squeezed past her. We're probably going to have to leave within a few days. I think we just poked a hornet's nest. I answered Brooke's first question as I squeezed past her. After handing off the bags of canned goods to John in the kitchen, I stopped by the bathroom and washed my face. I didn't look any different, but I felt like a killer. I went to the main practice floor where Luke had laid the girl on a mat. Sonny knelt over her, checking her eyes, while Ben, Brooke, and Allie looked on. Luke was standing to the side, massaging his neck. I guess she was heavier than I thought, he said. Is she going to be okay? Asked Allie. I think she probably has a concussion, said Sonny. We'll know more when she wakes up. I knelt beside him. No worse than that? I asked. Can't tell yet, Sonny replied. Her eyes are dilated, but not too much. I don't think the concussion is too bad, but once she wakes up, we better keep her from sleeping for a while. He looked at me. Luke told me what happened with the tigers. Do you want to talk? Thanks. Maybe. Not now. Okay, he said, and stood up. We'll need to talk about the tigers later, but for now, I'm going to get an extra blanket and pillow for our guest. If she wakes up, don't let her fall back asleep. Okay, I'll watch her if the others want to eat. Sounds good, said Luke. I'll eat and then come back and relieve you. Okay, thanks, I said, and looked closely at her for the first time as the others filed out. I guess to say she was beautiful would be a stretch. She had an ugly purple welt on the side of her face and was covered in dirt and grime. But none of that, not even the fact that her chestnut-colored hair had been crudely hacked down to a few inches, could hide her girl-next-door beauty. Beneath the rain slicker, which looked fairly new, her clothing was ragged, threadbare in some places, and it didn't take a genius to work out she'd been living pretty rough. I wondered how she could have survived on nights like this. The cold alone should have killed her. I checked her pockets but found no sort of wallet or identification, just a key to what looked like a gym locker and a half-eaten bag of gummy worms. I put them back where I found them and settled down to wait for Luke. About 5 minutes later, she moaned softly and turned her head. "Is she coming too?" Luke asked, drifting back into the practice room. The girl opened her eyes and looked around groggily. "Are you all right?" I asked, leaning over her. "Are you awake?" Her gaze fell on me. She had the most beautiful green eyes I'd ever seen. "Well, my eyes are open, aren't they?" she said, smiling. And that is how I met Indigo. 23. Indigo. What else can I say about her? As her eyes looked back into mine, I felt the beginnings of something. I didn't have much time to contemplate it just then, though, because suddenly it was as though someone turned on a light in her brain, and her smile disappeared. I saw her tense and thought she was about to scream or hit me. I drew back to give her room. Brooke, who had come in behind Luke, rushed over and put a calming hand on the girl's shoulder. Of course, she was wary at first. Who could blame her? Knocked unconscious during an assault, she woke to find strangers leaning over her, my face looming largest of all. "It's okay," I said. "You're safe. My name is Isaac. We're not going to hurt you." "I'm Brooke." "And I'm Luke," my friend said as he leaned over her and waved goofily. Slowly, she appeared to relax. Brooke helped her to sit up and asked if she would like some water. Our guest nodded and looked around the room as Luke darted out to get her a drink. I saw her eyes pause on the doors and windows. "What happened?" she asked when her eyes finally settled back on me. "Where am I?" "You're at the Martial Arts Academy on Main Street," I said. "My friend Luke and I were out searching for food when we saw you. We rescued you from those guys that were bothering you and brought you here." Her eyes widened at the memory. "You know those guys were tigers, right?" she said. "If you messed with them, they'll be looking for you. They're killers." "Don't worry about it. I don't think they know where we are." "Better hope so. They killed my cousin Chloe. They would have..." I saw tears well in her eyes, and I felt my normally icy heart begin to melt. I wanted to question her more about what happened to her cousin, but it could wait. First, we had to gain her trust and let her get over the shock of the attack. I changed the subject. "Are you hungry? We have some food here," I said. I could see the calm way I spoke to her, and Brooke's kind touch had begun to ease her fears. I hoped my offer of food would allay them even more. "Yes, thanks. I'm starving," she said, as Brooke helped her to her feet and started across to the old sofa Sonny had situated against the wall. "Brooke, I'll go and get some food if you want to stay with Indigo Buchanan." "Indigo. Cool. I'll go and get you something." I met Luke on the way as he returned with the water. "So what do you think, man?" Luke said, pausing in the hall. "She's alone and scared," I replied. "And really, who can blame her? She doesn't know us at all. For all she knows, we could be as bad as these tigers. She said they killed her cousin." "You think they did?" Luke looked troubled. "Yes, I believe her. You saw for yourself what they were like," I said. "Those guys were animals. Hopefully they never track us down or it'll be a fight to the death." "No kidding, Chief," Luke said. "If they kill an innocent girl, what are they going to try to do to us for killing their people?" "I'd rather we didn't find out," I said, shaking my head. Luke headed back with the water, and I went to the kitchen, looking through the supplies of canned goods until I found a can of SpaghettiOs. I put them in a bowl and grabbed a clean spoon. My footsteps echoed on the wooden floor of the academy's quiet halls as I walked back to where Sonny and his students were. When we got back to the main practice floor, Brooke was still sitting with Indigo on the sofa. They were quietly talking to each other. As cold and unappetizing as they must have been, Indigo was very pleased with the SpaghettiOs. She explained that it was her first meal in over 24 hours and was almost finished eating when Sonny entered the room with Karen and Arthur following behind. Indigo's eyes widened in horror when she saw Sonny, so I quickly put my hand on her arm as she dropped the bowl and tried to rise. "It's okay. Indigo, it's okay. This is Sonny. He's one of us." Still looking freaked out, she slowly settled back onto the sofa. Sonny wore a wry smile as I introduced Indigo to him and the other two, but he chose not to comment. "We turned the supply closet across from the bathroom into a room for our guest," Sonny said. "We put in a sleeping mat and some warm blankets, and you can stay there as long as you want." "Thank you," she said. "Aren't you worried the people will get jealous, giving Indigo a private room when no one else has one?" Luke said, a goofy grin on his face. "No," Sonny replied, seriously. "We all realize she's been through a horrible ordeal and may need some time to adjust. Karen here will show you to your room later, when you're ready to sleep." We all made Indigo feel as welcome as we could, and I think by the time we all went to bed, she knew she was in a safe place with people she could trust. I woke up sometime around midnight and couldn't get back to sleep. I decided to go and get something to eat. I made my way carefully through the tangle of sleeping bags and bodies on the floor of the practice room to the hallway and into the kitchen. Following my late-night snack of stale saltines, I was on my way back to the practice room when I heard voices coming from Sonny's office. One of the voices was Sonny. I didn't recognize the other. It was a woman's voice with a faint Chinese accent. Intrigued and, I have to admit, a little alarmed, I stopped to listen. Now understand, eavesdropping is not really my thing. But once in a while, curiosity and self-preservation will get the better of me. This was one of those times, and I make no apologies. "Why did you come here?" I could hear Sonny saying. "How could you just show up here after what's happened, after what your government has done?" "Sonny, our people didn't want this. I didn't," the woman said, emotion clear in her voice. "Many of us are just as appalled by what's happened as the rest of the world. Some in the upper echelons of government even tried to stop it, but they were brutally suppressed." "How can I trust a word you say? You work for them. Why shouldn't I just kill you now?" Sonny asked. His thoughts echoed my own, and I briefly thought of running to grab my rifle. I didn't. I knew Sonny could handle himself, and something in the woman's tone stopped me. "Please, trust me, Sonny. By coming here, I have placed myself in great danger," she said, a hint of desperation in her voice. "If you ever felt anything for me at all, please just listen to me." "All right, Huiyan. I'll give you 5 minutes," Sonny replied. "You better make the most of them." "Thank you," the woman, Huiyan, said. "You and your students need to get out of here. The People's Army is tired of losing trucks. They are planning to route an entire division to Worcester. In 3 days, if you are not gone by then, you will be rounded up and sent to a camp. That is, if you are not simply executed." "So that's what you came here to do? To threaten me? Who else knows about us?" "No, that's not why I came here at all," she said. "I came here to warn you and help you if I can. No one else knows. I am on the New England intelligence team. I requested it especially. We track resistance and movement over the 6 states, and there is a big red flag over this city. I saw the location and came here on a hunch. I knew the virus wouldn't have killed you, but well, I'm just so glad I found you alive." "How do you propose to help us?" Sonny asked, his voice softening a little. "I can provide you with a truck, and I can promise it will not be reported missing for 72 hours. Why would you do this for me? What the People's Republic of China has done is inexcusable. There are those of us trying to fight it, even now, or at least make sure that it never happens again." "That still doesn't explain why you would help me," Sonny said. The woman said something I couldn't make out. "What was that?" Sonny asked. "I said, 'Because I love you,'" she said in a louder voice. "I have always loved you, Sonny, since the first day I met you." "Then why did you go back, Huiyan?" Sonny said. "Why did you leave me?" "It was my duty, and back then, I put my duty ahead of everything, even love." "And now? Isn't it your duty to turn us in?" "Now I hold my duty to be a higher cause," she said. "It sickens me to think I ever put the needs of the People's Republic above my own, especially given the way they abuse that trust." "Well, thanks for the heads up, at least," Sonny said. "I hope you are not too offended that I don't welcome you back into my life with open arms. Too much water passed under that bridge. And besides, you blew it up on your way out the door." "I know. Someday, I hope to show you just how much you still mean to me. Until then, I just hope you accept what aid I can provide and keep yourself safe. If I decide to accept your help, where will you leave this truck?" "The same parking garage where you burned the last truck, on the same level," she said. "We've had the garage under surveillance since we tracked the GPS locator on the truck you dumped there. I will order the surveillance withdrawn at noon tomorrow. You can pick up the truck any time after that." "What about the GPS locator on the new truck?" "Take this envelope. It has keys to the truck and instructions to disable the GPS unit. I already thought of that for you. When you're through with the truck, park it out of sight. Without an active GPS unit, it should be a long time before they find it." "I don't suppose the truck will be preloaded with supplies?" Sonny asked, and I imagined the grin on his face. "The gas tank will be full, but that's about the extent of what I can do safely. Once you get out of Worcester, stick to the more rural areas. The People's Army is focusing on cities at the moment. They're trying to get them ready for the first wave of repopulation. The government wants civilians to begin occupying North America within 1 calendar year." "Damn them to hell," Sonny spat. "I must be going. The longer I stay, the more danger there is I'll be missed. I hope you and your students find a way to remain free. And if in the future I can help you again, I will." I moved away from the door and crouched behind a display case. It was dark in the hall, but the moon was bright outside and pools of light were cast through the frosted windows. I saw the owner of the voice, a tall, attractive Chinese woman in a black uniform, come out of Sonny's office. She glanced up and down the hall before hurrying off toward the academy's lobby. If she saw me, her eyes betrayed no hint. A few moments later, a thoughtful-looking Sonny walked out of the office and headed toward the kitchen. When he was gone, I hurried back to my sleeping bag. I wasn't sure what to think about the conversation I'd overheard. On one hand, I was excited about the prospect of a clean truck to escape in, but I was also worried it might be a trap. I pondered it as I tried to sleep. Why would the Chinese woman, Huiyan, create such an elaborate trap if she already knew where we were? I tried to think of everything I knew about China and Chinese history, and in the end, I decided the concept of logic was not foreign to them. Either she was genuine, or it was a trap for a bigger fish. Maybe there would be an extra GPS transmitter on the truck, and Huiyan hoped we would lead her to other groups of survivors. Maybe she already knew about the safe haven and hoped to use us to find it. I decided to talk to Sonny about it, no matter how uncomfortable I felt about eavesdropping. Part 4. Death Comes Calling. 24. The rest of the night passed uneventfully, and I awoke just as the first light of dawn came through the high windows overlooking the practice room. Brooke and Ben were already up and had left the room. Luke was awake but still lying snug in the comfort of his sleeping bag. I wondered if I should tell him about what I had heard the night before, but figured it could wait until after I talked to Sonny. "I'm surprised you haven't checked on Indigo already, man," Luke said, grinning, as I struggled to extract myself from my sleeping bag. "I saw the eyes you were making at her last night." I felt myself redden, but didn't bite. "She's probably sleeping in till lunch," I replied. "Sonny told Allie and Karen to stay with her last night and keep her up till at least midnight." Luke yawned, making no attempt to get out of his own sleeping bag or to pursue his friendly ribbing. "Do you know where Ben and Brooke are?" "I think they had something to do with Arthur and John this morning," Luke said. "Looking for supplies in the office building across the street or something like that." "What kind of supplies do they hope to find there? Office buildings don't seem like a good place to look for food or survival gear." "I couldn't tell you," said Luke. "Anyway, I don't have any plans this morning, so I'm just going to lay here and sleep." I stood up and stretched, working the kinks out of my muscles. "Enjoy," I said to Luke, and headed out to find Sonny. I wanted to talk to him about his secret rendezvous well before noon, when the woman had said the surveillance would be switched off. Sonny's office was empty, so I wandered to the kitchen to find myself something for breakfast. Samara and Mark were already there, eating bowls of cereal moistened with condensed milk from a can. At 14, Mark and Samara were Sonny's youngest students. They could hold their own on the mat, but Sonny chose not to take them on missions because of their age and smaller size. They were nice kids. "Is there any milk left in the can?" I asked, grabbing a bowl of my own from the countertop. "Yeah, maybe a quarter of the can," Mark replied. He pushed the can of milk toward me as I sat down. Samara did the same with the box of cornflakes. "Thanks," I said, fixing myself a bowl. The condensed milk had a much stronger flavor than the 2% milk I was used to putting on my cereal at the Foster's house, but it was still edible. "Have you seen Sonny?" I asked. "He went up into the attic early this morning," Samara said. "That's where they keep the training weapons. He goes there for alone time." "Thanks," I said, and shoveled another spoonful of cornflakes into my mouth. I found Sonny sitting in the lotus position, meditating in front of a stand holding a pair of 9-ring broadswords of Chinese make. He looked up at me as I entered the room, his face placid. I looked around, taking in the racks of ancient weapons lining the walls. Samara said the academy stored its training weapons here, but all of the weapons in the attic looked frighteningly real to me. There were long staves, short fighting sticks, spears, strange polearms, nunchaku, daggers, and an assortment of Asian-style swords. A large corkboard on one wall held dozens of throwing stars and other shuriken. "I've decided," Sonny said. "We should go with you, and in my mind, the sooner we leave, the better." "Okay," I said, sitting opposite him. "I know about Huiyan. I overheard part of your conversation with her last night. I half expected him to be angry at my spying and braced myself for an argument, but he just stared at me, expressionlessly, before nodding. Perhaps there is something to that meditation stuff after all." "Did you overhear the offer she made to me? About the truck?" "Yes. Do you think we can trust her?" I asked. "I'm worried it might be a trap, but it seems overly elaborate if she already knows where we are." "The same thought crossed my mind," Sonny said. "That's why I came up here to think. I find meditation brings clarity when my mind is clouded. In the end, it seems to me we have to trust her. We have very little choice in the matter. Stealing a truck is impossible with the army on alert." "Yeah, I suppose you're right," I said. "When are we going to get the truck?" "We'll go this evening, as soon as it gets dark," Sonny replied. "We'll bring it back to the alley and load it tonight with the supplies we're bringing. I'll drive, wearing the Chinese uniform, while the rest of you stay in the back. We shouldn't have many problems if she was being honest. We'll try to head off by noon tomorrow." "That timeline sounds good to me," I said, going over it mentally. "I'll let Luke know. We'll come with you when you go to get the truck." "You know, it could be dangerous," Sonny said. "Even if it's not a trap, that parking garage is in Tiger territory. After what you did when you found Indigo, they'll be on the lookout for you." "I know, but everything is dangerous now. We won't let you down." "All right, you can come," Sonny said, nodding his head. I want to bring at least one more person with us, though. I think Arthur. Sounds good to me, I said. I might head down and try to get more sleep. I didn't sleep too well last night, and it sounds like we're going to have another long night ahead of us. Okay, I'll try to come up with something more resembling a plan, Sonny replied. I'll wake you up around noon and fill you in on the details. 25. Allie woke me around 11:30 to tell me that the new girl, Indigo, was asking to see the guy who had rescued her. I said thanks and yawned much more nonchalantly than I felt. As soon as she had left, I jumped out of the sleeping bag and ran to the bathroom to make myself presentable. This consisted mostly of patting down my sleep-tousled hair and shaking my head at the bruising around my eyes, which had now faded to an ugly yellowish green. I decided that I had done all I could and walked the short distance from the bathroom to the supply closet Sonny had given Indigo as a room. Strange. I felt more nervous than I had when we faced off against the gangbangers. I knocked on the door. Come in. Okay, I said, and opened the door. I found her sitting on the folded mat that was her makeshift bed. Warm blankets gathered around her legs. She looked up at me and smiled. Isaac, right? She said. I just wanted to thank you again. I say again, but in all the hustle and bustle of last night, I'm not sure I even managed to thank you the first time. Don't mention it. Luke did more than me. He even carried you back. Besides, we make a habit of rescuing damsels. Almost as soon as the flippant words were out of my mouth, I thought of Sarah. Yeah, I know, I thanked him too, she said, and then, perhaps noticing the sadness on my face. One day you'll have to tell me about these other damsels you saved. Does that mean you plan on sticking with us then? I asked, trying not to sound too desperate. The last thing I wanted to do was come across as some sort of lecherous weirdo. Yeah, if no one minds, she replied. This place seems safe and comfortable. She paused as she saw me bite my lip. What is it? You probably haven't heard yet, but we're kind of planning to leave the academy tomorrow morning sometime. It's getting too dangerous here. We found out something, and it means we have to get out. And quick. You can come with us, of course. Okay, she said, puzzled. I guess I've got nothing keeping me here in Worcester. I blabbed. I couldn't help it. Her attentiveness and soft nature just put me at ease. I ended up telling her about Huiyan's warning that the Chinese army was sending a division to Worcester. I also told her about the offer of the truck and my fears it might be a trap. I even talked about traveling to the safe haven. She seemed as excited as I was about the safe haven, especially as it was as close as just 100 miles or so north of us. In the end, I talked to her for over an hour that day, about the future, but also about the past. I found myself opening up to her and telling her about my life before the flu. It seemed I wasn't good at keeping secrets from pretty girls, but it wasn't just that. Even though I'd only known her for a few hours, I felt I could trust her with my life. And after what I'd already told her, I probably had. She told me about her life as well. She was born and raised in Worcester. Like myself, Indigo had just turned 15 years old. In fact, her birthday was 2 days before mine. While she had not been a total loner in school like me, she hadn't been one of the popular kids either. From our talk, I began to realize just how smart she was. It became obvious that she was way more book smart than I was. Yet she didn't seem to have that in-your-face, smarty-pants attitude so many smart people have. She told me she had grown bored of school and had let her grades slip, despite the fact that she was perfectly capable of doing the work. Too many missed days and late assignments had torpedoed her marks to the point where her near-perfect test scores were not able to compensate. Her family had been a large, tight-knit family, with many aunts, uncles, and grandparents, along with a dozen or so cousins, all living in the same neighborhood. Despite this, Indigo was like myself, an only child. And now, she, too, was all alone in the world. She began to cry as she told me how close she had been to her cousin, Chloe, and I realized just how deeply it affected her when she was murdered by the tigers. It must have felt a lot like losing a sister. I asked her what happened. I saw hot anger dry the tears in her eyes. They were gathering food in a small supermarket when 3 tigers happened upon them. The tigers were rude and suggestive to the girls, and Chloe, always the sassier of the two, had smart-mouthed the ringleader. He shot her, just like that. Indigo and the other gang members had stood frozen in shock before she took off and ran for her life. He shot at her as she escaped but missed, and she had managed to elude them until the day before. I felt a seething anger at the dumb cruelty of the gang. Talking about it seemed to help, but I was relieved when the subject changed. Speaking of loved ones made me think of my own sister, Rebecca. I almost had trouble picturing her face in my mind now. Even the memories of my mom and dad were slowly vanishing in the same way, like old photographs fading to sepia in a forgotten shoebox. For some reason, I even told her of Amy, my foster sister, and how she had tried to be like a big sister to me that last Christmas day. I felt a hot rush of guilt about how unfriendly I had been on what was probably her last day alive. Then I told her about Sarah. Strangely, the loss of my real family and the Fosters didn't come close to feeling as fresh or painful as the loss of Sarah, and I wondered if something was wrong with me, or if it was just the fact that, for the first time in my life, I had lost someone that was in my care, someone who had looked up to me, trusted me with her life. "I think that's it exactly," said Indigo, putting a hand on my arm. I felt a jolt of electricity at her touch, and wondered if she did too. A knock on the door ended our intense conversation, and Indigo withdrew her hand as the door opened, and Karen stuck her head in. "Sonny would like to see you in his office, Isaac," she said. "I already told Luke and Arthur. They'll meet you there." "Thanks," I said, as she rushed off. I turned to Indigo. "I've got to go, but I'd like to talk to you more sometime, if it's okay with you." "Sure," Indigo said. "I enjoyed our talk. It feels so good just to be talking about what happened and remembering the people we lost. It feels cathartic? I think that's the word." I smiled. One thing Indigo and I had in common was a love of words. I even remember reading through a dictionary for fun during the 7th and 8th grades. It sounds nerdy, I know, but it's a fond memory, especially given there are no schools now, and won't be for a long time. No teachers, no students, nothing except survivors and invaders. I got up and paused at the door. I don't know if Sonny has told the others about Huion yet, so maybe not mention that to anyone yet. "No worries," she said, and gave me a wink. I headed to Sonny's office with a skip in my step, her touch still tingling on my arm. When I got to Sonny's office, I knocked and then walked right in. Arthur and Luke were already there. Sonny sat behind his desk, glanced up as I entered, motioning. Luke gave me a little salute, but Arthur didn't look up as he intently studied a spiral notebook open on Sonny's desk. "So, I take it you came up with a plan?" I asked. "Yeah, most of the details are written down." "It looks solid to me, man," Luke said. "I just hope we don't run into any unforeseen trouble." Arthur slid the notebook in my direction, and I looked over the plan Sonny had outlined. It seemed simple enough, barring any trouble from the tigers or a Chinese patrol, and getting the truck should be a piece of cake. "So, what do you think, Isaac?" I agree with Luke. It seems solid. "So, when are we going to do this?" Luke asked. "Yeah, I'd like to get it done and over with as soon as possible," Arthur said. Sonny checked the watch on his wrist. "We will leave here at 1600. Make sure you have your stuff ready." "Want to head over to the kitchen and grab some lunch?" Luke asked, as we left the office. "There are a couple of cans of chili con carne back there with our names on them." 26. After a relatively hearty meal of cold chili con carne with beans, I grabbed a couple of mixed fruit cups and a spoon to take back to Indigo's room. I still had a couple hours to kill before we went to retrieve the truck, and everything I planned to take with me was already in a pile next to my sleeping bag. With that in mind and remembering how good our earlier conversation had been, I was keen to talk with her some more. Unfortunately, I found her already in deep conversation with Brooke and Karen. Not wishing to intrude, I gave Indigo the fruit cups and said I'd catch up later. "That's very thoughtful of you, Isaac," said Brooke with a wicked glint in her eyes. I felt my face heat up a few notches and shrugged before closing the door on them a little too quickly. The sound of their cheeky laughter followed me down the hall. Not knowing what to do with myself, I decided to go find Ben and ask him what they had been searching for in the office building. I figured if Brooke was back, he would be as well. I found him in our sleeping area, playing chess against Luke and looking very frustrated. I settled in to watch the end of the game silently as Luke slowly dismantled Ben's defenses. After 4 moves, Luke declared checkmate and sat back with a satisfied smirk on his face. Ben looked at the table in disbelief for a few seconds before holding out his hand. "Good game," he said, looking like he had sucked a lemon as Luke shook his hand. "So, did you guys find anything interesting in the office building?" I asked him. "Not really, but I dare say we got what Sonny sent us there to get," he said. "Why he'd want all those toner cartridges is beyond me." "Toner cartridges? Like from photocopiers?" "Yes," Ben said, "plus several reams of printer paper and as many rolls of tape as we could find." "Why would he want those?" I asked. "Beats the hell out of me," Luke said, and rubbed his hands together. "I love a good mystery, though. Hey, maybe he's starting a newspaper? The post-apocalyptic Times." "Hardy har har," I said. "I'm sure he has his reasons, so we'll find out soon enough." "Are you going to take the rifle with you this afternoon?" Luke asked. I felt a short stab of remorse as I remembered what had happened the last time I held the rifle. I knew the gang member I shot had deserved it, but emotionally I wasn't quite ready to take responsibility for ending another human life so brutally. "I don't know. I was thinking about just sticking with a handgun on this one," I said, looking down at the chessboard. I wondered if Luke ever felt the same way about the tiger he had killed with the crossbow. In the time since, I found the killing gets easier, but the twinges of regret or guilt never really go away. The circumstances don't matter, really. It doesn't matter how bad the other person was. I always ask myself if maybe I could have done something different. And I always remember. "You want to play?" I asked. "No, I already had my fun," Luke replied. "Maybe Ben wants to play and redeem himself." "What do you say?" I asked Ben. "Sure, I'm always up for another game," he said, reaching for the pieces to reset the board. The sky clouded over during the day. This had the benefit of warming the night slightly, but at a cost. It had gotten darker earlier, and there was no moonlight to see by. Sonny, Arthur, Luke, and I cautiously made our way back to the parking garage, hugging the buildings and keeping to the alleyways and side streets as much as possible. The Chinese army was on all of our minds, but Sonny thought it was the red tigers we really needed to watch for. He was right. The parking garage was well inside their territory, and they were bound to be angry about losing 2 members the previous day. Sonny seemed to know a lot about them, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Thinking about the tigers made me realize it was less than 24 hours since I killed another human being. I'm pretty sure he was the first. The looter I had shot in front of the Foster's home had already looked sick. Maybe the leg wound had sped up his demise, but I'm certain it wasn't fatal. The thought of coming across one of the friends of the tiger I had killed chilled me in the way the cold night couldn't, and I was worried the others might suffer as a consequence of my actions. We walked through the darkness in near silence, moving carefully and by a circuitous route. It took us nearly an hour to reach the parking garage. As we arrived, the first flakes of a fresh snowfall began drifting down from the now completely dark sky. The plan called for Arthur and me to stay near the parking garage entrance, out of sight from the street, but where we could keep an eye on things. Sonny and Luke would continue to the truck, make sure everything was okay, and disable the GPS using Huiad's instructions before picking Arthur and I up on the way out. Sonny and Arthur were dressed in their black clothes, while Luke and I wore normal clothes and parkas. Nodding farewell to Luke and Sonny, I found a car to crouch behind, which afforded me a good view of the entrance. Arthur followed the others as far as the stairwell leading to the other levels and faded into the shadows. I realized, of course, that he was not a real ninja, but he sure did a good impression of one. 5 minutes passed with agonizing slowness. While I knew it must have been at least a little warmer inside the parking garage, I honestly didn't feel it. I was as cold as I'd been since we left my hometown. My fingers were like ice, and I placed my pistol on the concrete floor and rubbed my hands together for warmth. It had seemed dark outside, but now that I was crouched in the darkness of the parking garage looking toward the opening to the street, I understood just how much darker it was in there when I plainly saw 4 silhouettes appear in the entrance. My heart skipped a beat before starting to race. Tigers. That much was clear. One of them was holding a spiked baseball bat. Shit. They were speaking, but I was too far away to hear what they were saying. After a time, one pointed in my direction, and then towards the stairwell Arthur had disappeared into. 2 of the figures split off and headed deeper into the garage, toward me, while the guy giving the orders and the 4th headed for the stairwell. I tensed, and moving as slowly and quietly as I could, picked up the .38. I was comforted only a little by the cold, heavy weight of it in my hand. The tigers, including the one holding the nail-studded baseball bat, came directly towards my hiding position. As he got closer, I saw from his shape that it was the one Luke had christened Bat Boy after our earlier skirmish. With him was a taller, younger Asian teenager. Both of them had automatic pistols shoved in their waistbands. As they approached, I slowly scooted around the vehicle, keeping it between us. The last thing I wanted to do was use my revolver. I knew any shots would bring their other 2 friends running, and if they were armed with guns too, I didn't like my chances in a 4-on-1 shootout, or even 4-on-2 if Arthur came to back me up. Daring to cast a quick glance in that direction, I saw the other 2 tigers must have already entered the other stairwell. I took the relative silence from that direction as a positive sign that they had not stumbled over Arthur, so I quickly switched my focus back to the other 2. They had stopped no more than 10 feet away from where I crouched. "Are you sure it was them?" the taller one asked Bat Boy. "The bastards who killed Sammy and Jack?" "At least one of them," Bat Boy said. "I recognize the jacket of the kid with the crossbow." "Come on, let's keep going, and keep an eye out. Chen doesn't want them to slip past us and get out if they hear him and Hammer on the stairs," he said. "We better not slip up. I've never seen him as mad as when you told him Jack was dead. I feel sorry for the poor son of a bitch who was stupid enough to kill his kid brother." "Yeah, that little shit better hope he dies from a bullet, because if we capture his ass..." He slapped the nail-free part of his bat into the palm of his hand. I jerked at the loud slap and almost overbalanced. Chen's brother. The way they were talking. Chen was obviously the leader, and it turns out I had killed his brother. No wonder they were so pissed. The 2 tigers started walking again, and were soon far enough beyond where I crouched for me to relax a little. That feeling was short-lived, however, when it dawned on me that Luke and Sonny were in real danger. I had no way of getting past the tigers, either of the pairs, to give warning. Even if they finished with the truck and got it up and running before the tigers got to their level, they would have to drive right by at least 2 of the armed thugs to get out. I hoped Arthur had managed to get down the stairwell to warn Luke and Sonny before the 2 tigers headed that direction had seen him. That would be something, but getting out would still be a hell of a problem. Looking into the parking garage toward where the 2 tigers had vanished in the darkness, I strained and could hear the faint sound of their footsteps getting further away. When I judged them to be distant enough, I broke cover from where I was crouched and furtively moved to the stairwell. I had been in the stairwell before, when we had left the garage after burning the first Chinese truck. The street level of the parking garage was the top floor. The other 6 floors were located underneath, so from here the stairs only went one direction, down into the darkness. The stairs were located at the back of a small alcove with an elevator door in one wall. The stairs wound around the elevator shaft's column as they descended. There was a landing and an elevator door on each garage level. I paused at the entrance to the alcove, listening for the sounds of the tigers on the stairs. I didn't hear them, but I distinctly heard hurried footsteps coming towards me from behind. I spun around and found a middle-aged Chinese man sprinting at me from the street entrance. He pulled a long carving knife out of his belt as he came. Adrenaline kicked in, and abandoning any notion of stealth, I brought up the revolver and squeezed the trigger twice. The booms echoed through the parking garage. The first shot missed. I have no idea where the bullet went. The second shot struck the onrushing man just above the sternum, about an inch to the left. I expected him to be knocked backwards by the force of the shot. After all, it always happens that way in movies. But he just jerked slightly and kept coming. I stepped back against the wall, watching in disbelief as he steamed straight for me. The thought he might be wearing a bulletproof vest crossed my mind, and I was preparing to fire again when, 2 steps later, his legs gave out, and he slammed face down onto the cold pavement in front of me. Hearing a noise in the alcove behind me, I spun again with my .38 raised in trembling hands. The elevator doors were being pried open. As they slowly parted, I saw the elevator car itself was stuck someplace between this floor and the one below. About a foot of the car could be seen along with its roof, and there crouched Arthur. "Hurry up and get in here," he whispered fiercely, "before every tiger in the neighborhood shows up." I heard running footsteps from the car park as I clambered up next to him, and we worked to close the doors again. "What about Luke and Sonny?" I asked, puffing with exertion. "I already warned them. They should be hiding in the bottom of the shaft," he whispered, as the doors finally met. Darkness, absolute and impenetrable, cloaked the elevator shaft when the doors closed. "Keep your gun handy in case somebody tries to open these doors, but try not to move around or talk too much. We don't want to give them a reason to search here." It didn't take long before we could hear agitated voices talking loudly outside the elevator doors. Although we couldn't make out exactly what they were saying, the man I'd shot had been found. Not exactly surprising, since I'd left him lying out in the open. Adrenaline was still coursing through me, and I felt more than a little bit jittery. So much so that when someone hammered on the door, I pointed my gun in that direction and was about to squeeze the trigger. I felt Arthur's hand touch my shoulder. "No," he said, his whisper barely audible in my ear. "Shoot only if you see light from the sliding doors opening, and make every shot count." The voices outside the elevator died down, and after a while, stopped altogether. I thought they had left to continue their search through the parking garage, or perhaps went out to comb the streets, thinking we'd slipped out after shooting their rear guard. But I couldn't be certain. For all we knew, there could be a tiger standing in the alcove, waiting for somebody to stick their head out. "Should we try the door?" I whispered to Arthur. "No, too risky right now," he said, producing a small flashlight from the pouch on his belt. He flicked it on. The cone of light played over the walls and floor of the shaft, and then he pointed it up. The building that the parking garage was located under was a 4-story office building which held mostly law offices and accounting firms, if the sign at the front was any indication. The shaft continued up into the building above, although Arthur's torchlight didn't reach that high. It did, however, illuminate the elevator doors of the 2 stories above us. "Do you think that they'll be searching for us in the office building itself?" I asked. "I doubt it. Not yet, anyway. The only door from the parking garage into the building lobby is closed off with a chain and a padlock. I found that out when Sonny had me scout this place when we were looking for places to dump the first truck we took. As long as the chain's in place on that door, they won't think we went in there, and the stairs only lead down further into the parking garage." "Do you think we can get up there?" "I don't know," Arthur said. "I was hoping that there would be some sort of maintenance ladder or something, but there isn't. I don't think climbing the cables would be that easy, and even if we did, I'm not sure how we would get the doors open while clinging to them." "I see what you mean," I said. "Although, the doors have rails they slide on. Maybe we could stand on the rails to one side of the door and push them open." "Yeah, maybe," Arthur said, not sounding convinced. "Another option would be to hide in the elevator car itself. There's an access hatch over there." He shone the light over to illuminate a trapdoor a few feet from where I crouched. With the narrowness of the hatch, I don't think any tigers checking the elevator shaft from above would look for us in there. Yeah, but if they did climb down and find us inside, well, it would be like shooting fish in a barrel. Not sure I want to be a fish. Arthur switched his light off and we squatted there in silence for a few moments. In my mind, it seemed the question was mostly theoretical, as we seemed to be safe where we were for the time being. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off, and a vague sense of exhaustion was replacing the jittery excitement that I had been feeling. "How long do you think we should wait before we do something?" I asked him. "Let's give it another few minutes." "Sounds good to me," I answered. We waited silently, my brain working overtime as it cycled through the different ways this could end, most of them bad. Finally, Arthur whispered, "Okay, let's give it 100 count." "Okay." I began to count upwards from 1 in my head. I took my time, carefully regulating my count speed with a Mississippi between each number. It was a long 100 seconds. We didn't hear a sound outside, but that didn't ease the tension and fear I felt at the prospect of leaving our little sanctuary. Arthur finished counting before I did, switching his flashlight on while I was still in the low 90s. Holding the light in his mouth, he stepped up to the door and began to pull it open. The inner door opened easily, but the outer door required more work, and I began to appreciate just how difficult it had been for him to get in here and then to allow me in later. We got the outer door open a crack, and I put my eye to it. I couldn't see anyone waiting to ambush us, so I gave Arthur a nod. We grabbed one door each and slid them open enough to allow us to get out. He hopped out first, and I followed. The stairwell alcove was empty, but the body of the man I shot had been pulled to one side. "They'll still be around here someplace," Arthur said quietly. "The tigers aren't known for giving up." "That's not going to help their mood either," I said, nodding toward the dead man regretfully. Now that we were back out of the pitch darkness of the elevator, I had to ask him something I was curious about. "How did you know?" I asked. "How did you know I was going to shoot my gun in there? There's no way you could possibly have seen me in the dark." "You stopped breathing," Arthur said. "Sonny taught me holding one's breath is often a sign that violent or stressful action is about to be undertaken." "You must have super hearing," I said, pondering that a moment. "I wonder how he and Luke are doing." "Well, we haven't heard gunfire, so I guess they're okay for the moment. We can't think too much about it, though. They'll have to handle it themselves. We have to decide what we're going to do." "Yeah, what are you thinking?" "As I see it, we have 3 options. We can try and make our way down to the truck and the others. We can bail and go back to the academy, or we can stay here and basically do nothing." "Option 2 is out," I said. "I'm not going back while they're still in danger." "If we stick to Sonny's plan, we should stay here and wait for them," Arthur said. "Luke likes to say that no plan survives first contact with the enemy," I said. "I think we'll need some revisions to Sonny's plan." I looked at the stairwell and then toward the parking garage. "I think we should head down, but instead of the stairs, we should go down the ramps. If we try the stairwell, there's always the chance we'll miss Luke and Sonny leaving in the truck. If we walk down the parking ramps and they happen to be on the way out, we can just jump in." "Fine. If that's what you want to do, let's do it," Arthur said. He sounded a little peeved that I was taking control and tried to wrest it back. "We are going to move quick and quiet, stay low, and keep a good lookout. And for God's sake, don't shoot anybody." "I'll do my best," I said, shrugging my shoulders. Creeping along the inner wall of the parking garage, we moved as swiftly as we could while still being stealthy. I knew I didn't want to be taken unawares by a couple of gangbangers, and I was sure that Arthur felt the same way. Mom, my real mom, used to say if wishes were fishes, we'd walk on the sea, as a way of telling me I wasn't always going to be able to get everything I wanted. Back then, when I was just a kid, I never understood what she meant. I do now. We had just rounded the first turn in the garage when the guy with the bat stepped out from behind a car right in front of me. A shot of adrenaline sent my heart racing in my chest. I ducked as the bat whistled through the air where my head had just been, slamming into a car's fender, the nails denting it and scratching the metal. I tried to bring the .38 up, but the gangbanger's foot caught me in the pit of my stomach, and I was knocked backwards to the ground, the air whooshing out of my lungs. The revolver slipped from my grasp and skittered a dozen feet across the cold pavement. "I got one!" he shouted, stepping over me as I lay gasping for breath. "It's the guy who gunned down Jack. I'll bet you wish you had a machine gun now, don't you, bitch? You little punk-ass bitch!" He raised the bat, its wicked nails shining silver in the dimness of the parking garage. I held my hands up in a futile gesture of self-defense. Shit! I closed my eyes as he swung and waited for the blow. It never came. Instead, I heard a grunt of pain and surprise. I opened my eyes as the tiger stumbled to one side, the bat now in one hand as his other struggled to reach around under his shoulder blade. Arthur was a few feet away, balancing on the balls of his feet, but the tiger was oblivious. His face, which had been etched with hate only a moment ago, was now pale. His eyes widened as he found what he had been reaching. I watched, hypnotized. Finally, he gained purchase on whatever he was reaching for, and took a deep breath before jerking his arm violently. He looked at the bloody object in his hand in disbelief. I had seen throwing knives like it before on the racks in the academy attic. While he was distracted, I started to slowly crawl backwards away from him. I needed that gun. My attacker started to turn, as if he suddenly realized that if there had been a knife in his back, then... Arthur hit the man with a vicious kick to the same place the knife had struck. Roaring with pain and stumbling with the force of the kick, the gangbanger turned to face him while swinging the bat one-handed. Arthur walked into the swing, and the thug's arm, rather than his bat, slammed into Arthur's side. Allowing this to happen was evidently part of Arthur's plan, because he then brought his right arm down to trap the wrist of the tiger and at the same time gave him a brutal palm strike to the chin. Bat Boy didn't even groan as he fell to the floor. "Are you all right?" Arthur asked as I scooped up the revolver and scrambled to my feet. "Yeah, thanks," I gasped. I was trying to regain my breath, but stood partially bent over while I sucked wind. "Is he dead?" "Not yet," Arthur replied, "but we should finish him off before we move." His words were cut off by 3 impossibly loud gunshots coming from behind the car to our side. I dropped to the ground and heard Arthur drop behind me. I scrambled to the car and peered under it, scanning for the feet of the gunman on the far side. I couldn't see any. "Are you okay?" I whispered to Arthur, still straining to see. "Arthur?" I turned. Arthur was lying on his side, his eyes open and unblinking as a deep crimson, almost black pool of blood formed around him. "Shit. Arthur!" A scuffing noise brought me back to reality, and I quickly looked under the car again. This time, my gaze fell on a pair of red leather cowboy boots moving cautiously toward the car I was lying behind. Figuring the other tigers were probably already on their way, I decided this was it. I was going to go out in a blaze of glory. I aimed my gun at the cowboy boots, and almost as if he wanted to be shot, the wearer stopped perfectly still, one leg behind the other. "Roy?" he called. I pulled the trigger. The roar of the handgun was deafening. The bullet struck the tiger wearing the cowboy boots in the right ankle and continued on through his left heel. There was a cry of agony as he collapsed to the concrete, his gun clattering away when he used his hands to break his fall. The wounded man turned his head, and his eyeballs locked onto mine. For a moment that stretched on forever, we stared at each other. I knew the fear I saw in his eyes was mirrored in my own. He reached for his pistol. I shot him in the forehead. 27. I'd taken my first human life less than 24 hours before, and now I'd taken 2 more. It seemed I was on a roll. Maybe I was responsible for another as well, I reminded myself. Arthur. I felt sick. Arthur was only here because I had wanted to come this way. It may sound strange, but right at that moment, Arthur's death weighed on me more heavily than the lives I had actually taken. As I lay on the cold concrete in shock, I thought about Karen. If I managed to get back to the academy in one piece, I was going to have to tell her that Arthur was dead. As I'd watched them together over the week, I remembered thinking how lucky they were to have each other as the world was falling apart around them. Now, because of my decision, Karen was going to have to face this shithole of a world alone. Is this really what being a leader is? Getting people killed with the choices I make? The thought frightened me. Who would ever willingly accept such a responsibility? I waited a minute but didn't hear or see anyone rushing my way. Warily, I slowly pulled myself up into a crouch and peeked over the hood of the car. My luck ran out. In the gloom of the garage ahead, I saw two figures appear. They were moving slowly, one holding some form of handgun and the other a rifle or shotgun, I couldn't tell which. I swung open the cylinder of my .38 and with trembling hands shook the 4 spent cartridges into my hand and carefully set them on the floor. In my pocket I found some new shells and reloaded the revolver. I was trembling so much as I closed the chamber that I was almost in disbelief that I hadn't dropped any shells. Staying low, I moved toward the back of the car, trying to find a better position from which to make my last defense. They kept coming, bold as life, walking to the middle of the lot, slow and deliberate. They were about 20 yards away from where I looked over the trunk of the car, ready to duck if they aimed at me. I knew instantly that one of them was the leader, Chen, the brother of the one I had killed in the alley. How did I know? I'm not sure, except to say that his fearless and self-confident march toward my hiding place marked him as a leader. He was tall and well-built, and despite the cold, wore a black, sleeveless muscle shirt. "Don't come any closer," I yelled, trying to sound more confident than I was. The man walking with Chen stopped instantly, but the leader sauntered on. "Stop!" This time he did, but not in a submissive way. He planted his feet and kept his hands by his side, the shotgun pointed safely at the floor. I took in his hard face and slicked back hair. Then he laughed at me. Of all the things that I expected, this was not one of them. I felt myself redden. As a child, I hated kids at school laughing at me when I wasn't in on the joke. It had made me feel weak and stupid. In the vulnerable state I was in right then, his scorn succeeded in doing just that. "Well, what have we here? A little man with a big gun. Why don't you come out and we'll talk about all this nonsense?" He actually sounded reasonable, and I almost stood up, but then I spotted his buddy take a step. "I said stop!" I yelled and fired a warning shot into the air. It hit the concrete above me and the bullet ricocheted dangerously close. As the chips of concrete and dust fell onto the car, I was gratified to see a look of uncertainty flash across Chen's face as he waved the other man back. "No need for that, little man," he said, smiling. "I just want to talk to you. I believe you knew my brother." Unexpectedly, he crouched and put his shotgun on the floor. When he stood, he began to walk toward me again, this time with his hands up. I raised my gun and pointed it at his head. Now, you wouldn't shoot an unarmed man, would you?" He judged correctly. I couldn't shoot a man who was unarmed with his hands up. My gun hand was shaking, and I knew he could see it. "Stop." I said, "Stop." It sounded weak, and he didn't stop. "It's okay. We're just gonna talk, little man," he whispered, as he reached the other side of the car. I felt like I was under the control of a snake charmer. I knew he was lying. As soon as he was within reach of me, I was as good as dead. That was when the truck screeched around the corner behind them and the parking garage was flooded with light. Chen spun around as the fast-moving vehicle sped towards us. Chen's partner raised an arm to shield his eyes from the bright headlights as the rifle in his hands barked. He was too slow. The truck struck him, and even though it was a glancing blow, he flew off to the side like a rag doll as the truck came barreling on. Chen was a lot quicker. He glanced at me, the soothing look on his face transformed into one of venomous hatred. "Not over, bitch," he spat, before sprinting to the safety of the stairwell. The truck locked up its brakes and screeched to a stop beside me. The passenger side door opened, and Luke held out his hand. "Hurry up! Get in!" he yelled. "Where's Arthur?" I grabbed Luke's arm, and he helped pull me up into the cab. A rifle shot sounded behind us, and we heard the ping of a bullet ricochet off the back of the truck. "Where's Arthur?" Sonny repeated, glancing over from the driver's seat. He didn't make it," I replied, a sob escaping my throat. Sonny's face spasmed in anger before he stepped on the gas again, and we lurched off. I nearly fell out as we took the corner fast, but Luke gripped me tight and managed to pull the door shut as we careened down the ramp. I heard a number of shots ping into the back of the truck, but we met no more tigers as we roared out of the parking garage and skidded onto the icy street. Sonny drove erratically, taking random turns, I assumed in order to confuse any pursuit, but he soon began to slow down. "Sonny, what are you doing, dude?" Luke asked, looking at our driver. With my hurried entrance into the cab of the truck, Luke had shuffled across and was right next to him now. Not only was Sonny driving slower, but he was hunched over the wheel and seemed to be having trouble keeping the truck straight. "Is there something wrong with the truck?" I asked. "No, the truck is fine," he gasped. "Can either of you drive? I've been shot." The end of Episode 1. You've been listening to Hell Week, Episode 1 of the America Falls series, written by Scott Medbury and narrated by Adam Barr. Copyright 2018.